You are now rocking with the best Illmatic Podcast with your host, Louis L. Reed. Surviving beats, overcoming breaks. We got motion. Your go-to podcast unpacking hip-hop, trauma, and transformation.
What's up, y'all? This is your man, Louis L. Reed, back for another dynamic episode of Illmatic Podcast, Surviving Beats, Overcoming Breaks. Got another special guest here. I'm going to butcher her last name. I'm going to call her Sharday. However, she has like this enunciation that just kind of like flows. It goes. So I'm going to allow her to introduce herself. Tell us who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, so my name is Sharday Urtarte.
Say that one more time.
Urtarte.
Can you say that 3 times fast?
Yes, Urtarte. Man, I haven't done that in so long.
Yeah.
But I am from the Bronx. I am a Bronx native.
You from the BX?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm originally from the South Bronx.
South Bronx. Mm-hmm. Okay.
In my current field right now, where I stand is I work in reproductive health.
You work in...
Yep. So I work for a national organization, and my focus is specifically on Black maternal health, while putting a lens into Latina maternal health.
You said Latina, and people like look at you and they like, wait.
Yeah.
I hear like the roll of the tongue, but I don't see, there's something incongruent here. Like, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's really a great question, while also a great observation, right? So it's about proximity of color, right? So, and to dive deeper is the proximity of Blackness. So you look at me and I am a Black woman, which is absolutely true. I live in this space as a Black woman. I embody being a Black woman, but that doesn't take away my culture.
And what's your culture?
And my culture is I'm Dominican.
You're Dominican?
Yes, both of my parents are Dominican.
I would expect you to be from Washington Heights when you say that.
Absolutely. It's like a rite of passage, right? Like, my abuela came to this country. She settled uptown.
Yeah.
She lived in the same apartment for like 30 years.
Yeah.
Like, where the uptown is the root of me, but the Bronx raised me. Okay. For sure.
That's dope.
Yeah.
And the Bronx is the birthplace of
hip-hop. Always and forever.
Yeah. All right. Don't.
It's true. Look, my mama lived at 1520, so it's real. Okay?
Here's the Bronx girl coming out. So talk about how we connected and like it's life is so it will intersect you with someone at the most random times and under the most unforeseen circumstances.
Absolutely.
How do we connect?
Yeah, so we connected through LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I'm a really big believer in the power of connection, right? Which, if we dive deeper to that, it's the power of networking. Yeah. And so I've been in this space where if I'm going to network, I too have to put myself out there. Yeah. So there's a really good podcast that's called CEO Podcast, or Becoming the CEO, excuse me. And it's founded by Sabrina Campbell. And she's important because she produces a space for Black women to understand how to become their true self. And her whole point is that you have to network. You have to put yourself in the room. And so a really good sis of mine reached out because she was doing a check-in, which is also important, right? To holding Black spaces is making sure you check on your people. And so Makeda's a beautiful friend of mine. She reached out, we did a catch up. And I was telling her, like, I'm trying to get back into prison reform. That is the foundation. That is my passion. Yeah. And so
we're going to talk about why that's a passion for you afterwards.
Right. Yeah. And so she was like, oh, have you heard of Louis L. Reed? And I was like, no. And she was like, he was at a conference of ours. Like, reach out. And so I said, okay, let's reach out. And so I connected on LinkedIn. And like, without going too far, if you use social media correctly, you can be in these spaces, right? Like, the pandemic absolutely showed us that your voice doesn't stop or start in the streets. It can be anywhere, right? And so I reached out. I told you who I am. I told you what I'm about, right? And LinkedIn allows you the space to really come at a professional platform, right? My profile also speaks for itself. And I'm truly about this work. So I think that because of that, I felt comfortable enough reaching out. And I also did my research, right? I'm not going to reach out without knowing who you are. And also, if you were to ask me the real questions, I need to be able to answer that.
Yeah, and it was I love the notion, like, when you reached out and we kind of like connected almost immediately. Yeah. You was like, yo, I'm gonna FaceTime you.
Yep. Absolutely.
It was no Zoom. It was no. You're like, I'm gonna FaceTime you. We FaceTime. She had a bonnet on. It was like halfway over here, and I'm like, sis, what's that? Nah,
that is so not true. That is not even close
that is
to
so
true.
typical black woman stereotype.
Right. Like,
that didn't happen. But in the point of that, there was an inflection point in that conversation where there was some mutuality.
Absolutely.
And mutuality in terms of like experiences, our experiences. My mother and father having been incarcerated when I was 5 years old. Been raised by my maternal grandmother, etc. And you told me something that was just absolutely riveting. You talked about your mom being incarcerated.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so my mom was sentenced in the late 90s, so Rockefeller's Law was still in place during that time.
What were the Rockefeller laws?
Yeah, so Rockefeller Law sentenced you to the max of a charge, right? So my mother sold to an undercover cop, and it was weight. Like, there's no sugarcoat about it. My mother was from the streets. She believed in a certain path, and respectfully, that also provided me with the groundwork of my education. So there's two folds to that, right? And we also have to keep in mind the climate and the time. It's the late 90s. My mama wasn't doing crack. She was pushing coke, right? So it's like also thinking of that dynamic. You have a black Dominican presenting woman who is selling coke to an undercover white cop. That in itself.
That's a recipe for disaster.
Complete recipe for disaster, right? And it's not a place for opinion or judgment, right? A mistake was a mistake. And she knew what she was doing, right? Because we're not going into this with denial. But she shouldn't have been sentenced to the max, right? Because that's inhumane.
And what was the max?
The max for what my mother was pushing would have been 20 years to life. And so that's what we were up against, right? I was 9 years old. We fought for a year, so that means my mother got fully sentenced at 10. In that process, my father got the best attorney, but to get the best attorney, we had to put our house up for collateral. And in the process, that put us in bankruptcy, in full transparency. And then it saved my mother's life, though, right? Because my mother was only sentenced to 3 years.
And the interesting thing about that is when we say we're from only sentenced to 3 years, 3 years is still 3 years.
3 years is the whole loss of a childhood, right?
Right.
Like
it's 10 years old to 13 years old. You're going from help me say that. Pre-puberty
into becoming a girl.
Right.
And I say girl because I wasn't coming into my womanhood yet. It wasn't until my mother, after she was sentenced to 3 years, there's the process of what does parole look like, right? So
before we get to parole, what was it like for you to be exposed to the criminal legal system at 9 years old?
Yeah.
Have your family life disrupted at that approximate age? Yeah. And then your mom is gone.
Man.
What do PTA conferences look like? What does it look? Because it's where we from. It's easy for to account for the absence of a father not being in the house.
And that's the typical narrative, right?
Yeah.
It's a stereotypical narrative that is disgusting, and we need to erase it.
Yeah.
We absolutely need to erase it, because by not erasing it, then we're also not talking about the women who are sentenced till this day at the most ridiculous charges and at the highest rate.
So Sharday, we're gonna come back to that. When I was a kid, I remember this is the first time ever I'm speaking about this publicly, man. I'm getting a little misty-eyed about it. But I remember like making up stories when it came time for school and stuff.
Yeah, my mom was on vacation.
So your mom was on vacation. My mom, she was an educator. And so I used to tell people like my mom was away on like almost like a missions trip. And where people used to ask me about my dad, I used to be like, my dad is in the military. He's a military police officer, right? And these are the things, and I used to be embarrassed by it. Like I was embarrassed by my grandmother, who was a nurse, who did her best to take care of me and my sister. I used to be embarrassed by my grandmother coming to school because there was that generational gap.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, everybody else had relatively younger guardians and mothers and coming up to the school. And my grandmother was like, relatively older. And I used to be embarrassed by that, man. Because I knew how fly, like my mom was one of those moms where if you taste like beer, you better look like champagne.
Yeah, my mom was the same.
Right?
Mommy's the same, absolutely.
Yeah, and I remember one time being in the second grade. I'll never forget this. This was a woman. Her name was Miss Smith. And I had one of those can't sit still episodes that wasn't diagnosed as ADD back then. Right. You was just hyperactive and you just couldn't sit still. And I remember this woman, she was a teacher's aide. She grabbed me by my arm. She pulled me out of the class, and she put her finger in my face. It was like this close to the bridge of my nose. And she was like, if you don't stop, you're going to be just like one of them kids I read about in the paper.
How dare she?
And I remember like feeling so, like, even as I'm saying this now, I still remember, I can still see the sheen of her jerry curl in my mind's eye. And I knew that if my mother was around, my mother would have slapped the jerry out of her curl.
Yep, absolutely.
But I was so hurt by that. And I was so scared to go home to tell my grandmother what happened, because my grandmother put a premium on education. And my grandmother's generation was like, you go to school, you shut your mouth, and whatever the teacher told you to do, that is what you did. And so for me, like, growing up without a mom, like, that's what those experiences was like. And I wanted my mother there because I knew how fly my mom was, and I knew how pretty she light-skinned, wavy hair with the green eyes. Right? Right. And I knew that when she came through, she was going to come through, but there was no mom for me to come through.
Yeah, that's real.
What was that like for you?
It was hard. It was a very weird dynamic, because my parental setup is my biological father wasn't around. So my daddy, who gets all the respect, right, but stepped up, and he's always been there, but it was during those times where it was very obvious that this isn't my father, right? And it's a respect that I give him, and it's a loyalty that I give him. And the beauty of him is he stood there and he held it down, right, when my mother wasn't. And there were long nights of tears. There were, I vividly remember missing a school play because we had to go visit my mom, right? Or
how far was your mom?
So my mom was in Taconic Women's Prison. So from where we lived, that was about a 3.5-hour drive.
Oh my goodness.
And we ain't never miss a visit. And that was intentional. My father and I, he sat me down and he asked, right, like, can you do this? And I respect him, and I think that...
And you also have to consider 3.5 hours.
Oh, no, it was real.
That's 3.5 hours one way.
And then
that's
you barely
hours.
Get an hour visit.
Right.
To then come back 3.5 hours. And that's if there was no traffic.
And if the prison wasn't locked down when you got there.
Exactly, because there was one Christmas prison was locked down. So we done drove all that for what? And y'all couldn't tell us nothing? And it's just like, you know the process, right? Like, this ain't no game. And the process hasn't changed, right? There's laws that have been put in place, but there's no law that protects the broken child. There's no law that is going to give me those 3 years back, because what we also have to keep in mind is, just because you served your time doesn't mean your time is completed, right? So my mom came home to parole. My mom came home to a halfway house. My mom ain't come home to her house. She ain't come home to her bed. She didn't come home to love her family. And also, what is the trauma that she experienced? Does she know how to do that? Because I'm also asking, right, and it's a real deal. I'm asking my mother, who's been through 3 years of trauma, to come be my mom. And at the age I was at, I couldn't comprehend why she couldn't do it. Right? And that broke me. That broke me in a way that to this day it hurts, right? And the system in itself is what's broken. I will never argue that if you do a crime, you shouldn't serve time, right? And when I say time, I don't mean prison. It does not mean that you could do community service. You could pay a fine. There's so many other things that you can give time back to society because you took time away from society, right? But we have to examine that. We have to analyze, what does time look like? And we have to ask, who is producing the time? I'll never get those 3 years back. And my mama was in a halfway house for 2 years.
Oh my goodness.
Right? So now I don't get those 2 years back. And at one point, right, I was property of the state because my father wasn't my biological father. So my mother had to sign over rights. You're asking a woman who is in prison to get legal documents to sign me over. So while we're waiting for all of these things to happen, I'm absolutely in the system. So the system had their rights to me. They owned me, right? And they failed me. And that's the facts. So the story becomes not not this triumph story that everybody wants to hear, because it's easy to say that. It's easy to say she came from the hood, she had a little problem, she lost her little time, and now she's somebody, because my career is beautiful now.
Yeah.
But that's not the triumph story. The triumph story is that me and my mother built a relationship.
Yeah.
We talked. That's my girl.
Yeah.
You know, like, and even with the pain, I chose to heal and she chose to heal.
Yeah.
But that was not a product of the system. We had to decide on that.
You had to do that intentionally. So I'm thinking about having daughters, and
it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it depends on what day we can argue that another.
My father likes to do the same thing.
We can argue that another day in another podcast. However, I'm thinking about my daughters, and I'm thinking about how when my daughters were between the ages of 10 to 13, that was the time where they started, you know, coming into themselves.
Yeah.
They started blooming. You know, they started menstruating and things of that nature. And I'm having conversations with them from prison, trying to navigate that. They had a mother who never did time, that was there to, you know, in effect,
hold it down.
Yeah, hold it down. What was it like for you? like what type of like, what conversations do you have with your dad? Like,
that's my guy.
Yeah.
That's that is my heart and soul. That man is what a father is. He personifies being a father. He's exceptional. I was, oh my God, I was of teenage age when I got my period for the first time. And my mom prepped me. So my mom's background is in sex education. She worked in the HIV field. She worked with the LGBTQIA community, right? Very nonprofit. And I think there's a correlation to nonprofit drug reform and formally convicted individuals, right? It's like, it's there. But so my mom prepped me as much as she could. But do you remember that when you're in the moment, right?
Not at all.
And so I remember being in the bathroom and I remember yelling for my dad. And I think there was something internal about him that he just knew to, like, wait. And he was like, what's going on? And I was like, I'm bleeding. And then his first question was, from where? And I was like, you know, from there. And he was like, there's stuff under the bathroom. And I mean, under the sink. And it just hit, right? There's also a part where female survival kicks in, right? Like, my dad was there as a pillar. He was there for a moment of comfort. But I essentially went through that by myself, right? I went through birth control by myself. I went through my first kiss by myself. I went through figuring out who I am in the place by myself, right? Because my mom comes home at 13, but she's 2 years in a halfway house.
Right.
So now I'm, 15, turning 16? Now I'm really
High
feeling
school.
myself.
Oh, yeah,
You ain't
definitely.
gonna tell me that. And I was a fly little honey.
Yeah,
Ooh, I was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
doo, doo, doo.
yeah.
And so, because I'm her daughter, right?
Yeah.
Like, how you speak so highly of your mom. Like, my mom was fly, and she had a smile, and still does, that, like, just shines in a room, right? Like, she's truly a beautiful woman, through and through. But she got her faults, you know? And those faults, unfortunately, affected a major part of my childhood completely, because now there's a financial aspect, right? Like, college isn't really an option for me, right? And there's this idea, like, go to school, do this, do that. And one might argue, girl, you could have taken out school loans. Could I? Right? Because technically my father has filed for bankruptcy right now.
And you need the other parent basically to sign off.
Right, because
on it.
I'm not 24.
Right.
So my mama can't sign off because she's a former felon.
Yep.
Right. I'm sorry. At the time she is.
At the time she is. And her felony offense has to do with trafficking.
Yes, and it did. And it absolutely did. So my mama a felon at this time, so I can't get that. And then my dad is bankrupt, and that stays on your year. At the time, it was on your credit report for 10 years, not 7 years. So that changed. And so that's college for me. Where am I going? Like honestly, where am I going? So the little bit of money my parents had, they gave it to me, and I traveled the world. And that was my education for a really long time. And then I hit the hood.
What was traveling the world look like? What did that look like for you? Because I remember I've been one of those people where I've been privileged to live my life in advance. Even when I was criminal enterprising, I was able to travel.
I love that, criminal enterprise.
Yeah,
that's solid.
That's more.
That's good. I like that.
Term.
That's good. That's real good.
Thank you. It's not copywritten. You could use it.
Oh, I am.
So I remember, having lived in my life in advance, and I remember one time I was in a car with a friend of mine, and we came out here to New York, and we went to Brooklyn, and on the way back, I remember we were listening to Hot 97 back when people listened to radios.
Right. And radio had pull, real pull.
Yeah. So he turned the song down, and I distinctly remember the song that came on, that premiered on the radio. It was Freaking You remix by Jodeci.
Oh my God!
Yeah, it was a Freaking You remix with Jodeci and Raekwon. So he turns it down after it goes off, and we talking about the song. We like, yeah, that was so dope. And he's like, yo, bro. I was like, what's up? He's like, yo. He was like, I want to thank you. Oh. And I was like, for what? He was like, I've never been in New York before. And you got to consider,
that's touching.
We from Bridgeport, Connecticut, right?
Yeah,
Bridgeport is only. Yeah. You can do a hop, skip, and don't need a half of a jump and be in Bridgeport. And so I thought about it. I was like, wow, how many other people who I'm around, who I socialize with, haven't been outside of their four walls?
That's real.
And so for you to be able to have been exposed to that degree of trauma, not having your mom there, dad in bankruptcy, you trying to figure out your life, your mom comes home, she's in a halfway house, you guys are trying to mend your relationship, here's a little bit of bread, now you traveling the world. What does a girl who is from the Bronx, what does it look like for her to be able to travel the world at that age and stage in life?
Man, it was everything.
Yeah.
It was everything. It taught me grit. It taught me how to hustle. It taught me how to survive. I'm a writer by trade. It was during those times that my poetry came out, right? My activism came out.
I feel like you're giving me like some NDRE poetry
I'm
vibes.
A vibe.
Yeah, I can feel like the vibe.
I'm a vibe.
It's
like my energy is real. My heart is pure.
Yeah.
I've been through a lot, you know, but I will say when my parents gave me that, my mama was working at McDonald's on 34th Street.
Yeah.
And she was pushing. And I'll never forget, I used to get out of school and I would go see my mother because, like, you can't.
Did she give you free fries?
Listen. And a free McChicken. Listen. Boy, listen. My mama held it down, right? And you learn how to make it work with what you got.
Yeah.
And the little that she had, she put that together and was like, yo, get out. Just go do something. And so I got out. Like, boy, I went back to DR for a little bit. I went to Costa Rica, lived there for 6 months, spent too much bread, had to hustle back, and then I was in the States for a little bit, and then when I say the hood loved me, the hood loved me, the hood saved me, the hood raised me, and I would never discredit that. We have, it's not always safe. I'm not going to dispute that. It's not always safe. And it's
but it's the hip hop, it's the hip hop experience, right?
It's the culture. You know what I mean? Like two of my best friends, two beautiful men who came in and saved me in so many capacities. We would break up a John Fried Chicken $5 box together and put our little bread, right? And what does that teach you? That teaches you that at the end of the day, you always got family.
Right.
Like when my parents couldn't be there, I had it.
Yeah, family.
And that's
family.
And you create that, right? Like there's this new idea, where we talk about the importance of community. That's not new. If you're from where we're from, that's all you know.
That's all you know.
Like my abuela was filling the whole building. She took her little food stamps. Everybody on somebody's floor
and
got
back
something.
Then, that was the ripoff.
That was absolutely. You sold your food stamps for cash.
That's right.
And you could get a pound of rice. You know how many families you could feed with a pound of white rice? Carolina at that.
Yeah.
Like that was real. You know what I'm saying? And so my parents giving me the little that they had, I turned that into something. And then when I came back to New York, I worked all the clubs. I was your door girl. I had the look. I was bald. I was cute. I knew who to talk to. And that put me in a space. So now I'm talking to everybody, right? And that reminded me the beauty of being a Black woman. And then being Dominican is my essence, right? So being bilingual helped me in certain places. I'll be very honest with you. I never really had a real resume. Like, every job I had was off of personality in my interview. Because if there's one thing the streets is going to teach you is the gift of gab.
That's right.
And as long as you know the gift of gab, you can get anywhere. And I turned that into a power, right? I graduated, in full transparency, I graduated at the age of 31. I moved to Ohio, did my 7-year bid, as I like to say, in the Midwest, right?
Wait.
Yeah, no, it's real. I went to the Ohio State University.
Okay.
I am a Buckeye through and through.
Okay, all right.
Non-traditional student, and I ran it. Like, I did what I had to do, and I tell people a lot, right? The power of your story is how you convey it. No one's going to take my story away from me, right? No one's going to be like, oh, Sharday, you went to Ohio State. You must have been. No, you don't need to know the age. You just need to know I got this degree. So I get to convey my story, right? You don't get to tell me the narrative of my journey.
So we also talked about code switching as well.
Listen, I don't code switch. I ain't code switch on this little podcast right here, and I'm not going to code switch nowhere else. Right, and it's about respecting the language. It truly.
What does that mean? What does it mean to respect the language? What does it mean to respect your experience? And what does it mean to respect the culture as well?
Absolutely. So, I love that question. Respecting the language is understanding that you must meet people where they're at. Everyone doesn't have the same education, everyone doesn't have the same background, and everyone doesn't have the same leg up or the same starting point. If you truly care for people, if your essence to you is love, then you have the patience and the consideration to meet somebody where they're at and not ask them to change their vernacular or their language to meet you where you're at. Because that puts a self-esteem in one, right? That silences someone. That silences the child who becomes the adult who now doesn't know how to speak in spaces, right? And so when we take it from there, once you respect the language, then you can respect the culture. I spoke with an accent for a really, really long time, and when I'm really comfortable, my accent comes out.
I heard it just a little bit.
But in Black spaces, that takes away my Black agency, and we don't talk about that enough. We don't talk about the intersectionality of Blackness and how it is removed when you don't fit the part. I was in a space, and I'll fast forward into like where I'm at currently in my career. I'm really about the movement. Let's just start there. I'm really about the movement. I really do this. I don't play about this. And I say that very passionately because there's no other way to say it, you know? And I was in a space where a Black woman called me aggressive. And that was heartbreaking because that was the same Black woman that never pronounced my last name right. That was the same Black woman that minimized my name to a first letter. And that was the same Black woman that sat in a space with other Black women and treated and belittled me, right? And so there's many things to ask in that space. Was it because you didn't see me as a Black woman? And that is real because when I started this, I said the proximity of Blackness. We give Blackness based off of color. We don't accept Blackness on an intersectionality of experience. I am Caribbean and I am Black, right? And I will say this, know your history. To have this idea that the slave trade came from one continent and settled in America is disgusting, right? Those enslaved people didn't just end up in America. You have a whole Caribbean.
And that's it's also Willie Lynch kind of like remix.
Absolutely.
Because the powers that be would have us think that, so now we start othering people who look like us.
Exactly. And we hold space, right? So when I say I'm really about this, I know the education of my people. Study the Tuskegee Project in itself. You had Dominicans that were in that project. You had Dominicans that were Tuskegee Airmen. Like, don't come to me if you don't even know your own history. And don't disrespect or diminish a culture that you only know 20 years of history about. Gradually, maybe I might give you 40 if you actually took the time to learn. There's only one institute in the United States of America that teaches Dominican culture, and that's at City College. And it's not even a full major. You're actually under the American Studies, right? And that is a track that you can take. So essentially, I become a historian first who focuses on Dominican studies if I chose to go into that master's program. Even that in itself, one program in the United States of America has a program that has something to focus on a specific Caribbean culture. And they had to work for that profit because it's still a funded program.
I bet. So when you talk about the now, you talked about the then.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the now.
Yeah.
What does the now look like for you?
Oh man, so the now is I protect Black women. I protect Hispanic women, specifically Dominican women, because that is what's close to my heart.
Yeah.
So
I also on the periphery, I see you protecting Black men as well.
I love Black men.
Yeah.
Black men are the root of me. Black men saved me. Black men love me.
Yeah.
Black men treat me in a way that I deserve to be treated.
Yeah.
There's nothing better than a Black man.
I love to. We're going to keep going on, but I just love to hear that. You know why? Because when you go on social media,
yes,
you see the battle of the sexes.
You do.
And then you see us against us.
Yes.
And we're not protecting each other. And when we're talking about protecting, my grandmother taught me this notion. If you're going to call somebody out on anything, you better call them into something greater and up to something higher.
Oh, I love the elders. Love them.
Call them into something greater and up to something higher if you're going to call them out on anything. And what you see in this 15-second soundbite of virility on social media, where everybody seems to be calling each other we're calling each other out, but we're not calling each other in. And so it's refreshing to hear you without compunction say that I protect my people.
I do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because you have to. And it's my calling to do so, right? It's not to dismiss the many other activists that are doing the work that I do, but it's to say that I'm in the movement with you and I see you.
Yeah.
And I will fight alongside you.
Yeah.
I will fight in front of you, and I will absolutely fight behind you.
Yeah.
Like, we really in this, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, we have to uplift the Black man, right? Yeah. So I'll hit you with this real fact, right? So 6.5 million Black women between the ages of 15 and 49 live in one of the 26 states that has either banned abortion or is in the process of banning abortion. So if we put that in a percentage, that equates to about 57% of Black women. You think all them Black women is single?
That's the researcher.
Right, that is the researcher. That is. But you got to talk numbers and you got to talk facts, because one of the things that I hate about social media is that people just talk. Like, have your numbers, back that up, you know? And so it's like, my point to bring that up is, Black men are dating Black women. Black men are marrying Black women. Black men are having children with Black women. So of that 57%, or if you prefer numbers, 6.5 million Black women, you really gonna sit here and tell me all them women is single? You gonna sit here and tell me there's not a Black man in that household? So now you're putting Black men in a position where you're silencing them. And if we're talking about this is the biggest election in life, which, yes, it is. The election holds space. But Black autonomy holds more space. And that's really what this is about. It's about Black autonomy. For me, that's how I see it, right? I will never put my views on anyone, but that's what we're really fighting. And the voice of Black autonomy needs to come from Black men, because to say that they're not speaking about the issues in their spaces is wrong. The research shows that when Black men are comfortable, you give them the correct platform and you educate them in a manner where they feel safe and confident, they will talk about the issues that we need, right? Because Black women are dying. We're dying. And then when you take it even deeper, Latinas, 3 out of 4 Latinas live in a state that is banned. 3 out of 4 Latinas. And out of that 3 out of 4 Latinas, they live in a state where the closest OBGYN maybe is 10 miles from their home. So now you've put economics into this. You've put traveling into this. Where are we safe? So the fight can't continue to be based off of proximity of Blackness. The fight can't continue to be, who are you? The fight really needs to be that all agency needs to be on 2 bodies, right? We all deserve that, because the reality is we're talking about prison reform, we're talking about reproductive health, but it all coincides in the sense that your new felony, as I mentioned to you, is abortion. Without, like, reproductive health is the new felony. So now we are continuously putting Black bodies, Black doctors, Black nurses, Black OBGYNs, they're still doctors, but let's get specific. We are now putting them in a position where they will lose their license, they can be sentenced to 99 years, or on top of, because it depends on the state. So they could either be sentenced to 99 years or pay a minimum of a $10,000 fine. Or how about this? Both.
Yeah.
So now you're sentenced at the highest.
Yeah.
Hello, Rockefeller's law.
And you're out of 10. And
you out of 10 grand.
And who do you think, when the state comes to prosecute, who do you think that they're going to be more apt to prosecute? Somebody who is a white healthcare provider, or somebody who is black? And
it's based off of how they define black. Like, are y'all serious?
Yeah.
Like, this is real.
Yeah.
Like, we're really fighting a war. And if you don't know the history and you're not preparing yourself and arming yourself with the language to protect yourself, we're going to continue to die. Black women are dying.
Yeah.
The health crisis right now is black health mortality. The health crisis right now is our black men going into our doctors' offices and not feeling confident to speak up for their black partner, because it doesn't just have to be your wife, it can also be your partner. And it affects all of us. It really does.
One of the things that reminds me of, I remember my son's mother, she was having our son, and she had an epidural at the time. And when she had the epidural, the person put the epidural in her back in a way that was very uncomfortable. So when she said that it was uncomfortable, I think that the person might have been like, no, it's fine. I'm like, no, it's not fine. If she says it's uncomfortable, it's uncomfortable. Now you're going to do either one or two things. And I put my Richard Pryor voice on, that 70s black voice, voice. Like, look, brother, you're going to do one or two things, right? You're going but when I spoke up in that moment, I realized how the dynamics of the situation had changed. And so we need each other. Not only do we need each other in terms of the fight for freedom, but we also need one another in the fight for faith.
Oh, yeah.
Like, how do we maintain faith? How do we restore faith? How do we extrapolate faith from the things that we do? We need each other.
We absolutely need each other. We're getting away from just simply loving each other, right? Like, it doesn't always have to be this romantic or sexual love, right? Like, I spoke about my two brothers, right? They're not my biological brothers, but those are my brothers.
Yeah.
And they love me down.
Yeah.
And they held me down. That's a complete family platonic love that I chose to make my family.
Yeah.
I have sisters who I chose to make my sisters, right? My father remarried. That's technically my bonus family. They didn't have to come in loving and respecting me. No addition to your family has to respect or love you. You build that foundation. You build that relationship. My bonus mom, we worked at that. My bonus sister, we worked at that. My bonus brother, we worked at that, right? Because love is at the root of it. I believe that wholeheartedly. I move with love because I am love. I embody love, you know? And if you don't, you're just living an empty life. You know, like, it's not always good. But it can be fucking great. Sorry, I don't know if I can curse. I'm so sorry. But like,
we got a censor button that goes.
You know, like, thank you. But it's like, cool. It can be really great. It can be so high, and it can be so just livable. You know.
Give you the last words. Give us a status update on where mom is.
Oh, my mommy is retired.
She retired. She's too young to be retired.
Listen, she is. But my mother literally said, girl, I gave the system too much time. I can't do it no more. And I was like, I feel you. So my mom is retired. She's loving her dog way too much. And that's just me, because now it's apparently my brother. And I'm just like, stop doing that. Like, why are we doing that? But she's solid. She's solid. We still work at our relationship.
I was going to ask you that. Where are you guys?
We're good. It took us a long time, but that's my girl. That's my hitter. Like, I love her. And I don't love her just because she's my mother. I want to make that very clear, right? Like, I lost my mother at 10. That's just a fact, right? What I found and what I received back was a woman. And I see her fully. So I give her the respect because she's my mom. But I love her like she's my girl. Like, that's really my girl. That's my main girl. And we work hard at it. Like, it's hard for people to understand our relationship, but it's not for others to judge.
That's right.
That's me and her. No matter What?
And the same people who got something to say about your relationship, in fact, are probably struggling in their own.
They are.
Yeah.
Because we're honest in mine.
Yeah.
Me and my mother, we have no choice but to be raw. I mean, we did 3 years behind a glass, right? We did 3 years. My mother's getting searched inside. I'm getting searched coming in. Like, we both got patted down. We both was eating Tyson chicken from the vending machine. That's real.
That's real. Don't get any realer than that.
Hate Tyson chicken. Never eat it a day again in my life. Like, that's just real. So I respect her deeply. And, you know, I'll say this one thing. Regardless of what she'd been through and what she did, my career is because of my mother.
Amen.
Like, absolutely. So shout outs to her. She made
What's mom's name?
Sonia.
Sonia. Shout out to Miss Sonia.
Shout outs to Miss Sonia with her pretty smile.
Shout out to my mom, Lita.
Yes, Miss Lita.
Listen, it's been a pleasure to have you.
Truly a pleasure.
Yeah. Sharday
Urtarte.
Oh,
close. We're going to work on it. We're
close
going to work on
cigar.
it. At least you tried.
I
so I appreciate you for that.
Urtarte. And I'm Louis L. Reed. You can say that 3 times fast without tripping over yourself. This is Illmatic Podcast, Surviving Beats, Overcoming Breaks. Until next time, peace. We out here.
Until next time, like, subscribe, share. Illmatic Podcast, Overcoming Beats, Surviving Breaks. See you next time.